Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Cruise News Show. I'm your host, Tony, with a special episode today. In today's episode, I'm going to tell you why Democrats hate cruising. Are you mad already? This is the problem with the world today. You can take any story and put it through a filter and spin it in a way where you can villainize somebody. I really just want to talk about why you can't do cruises to nowhere. I've been sitting and watching the news for the last couple days because of all of the world events that are going on. I don't ever watch the news, and I try to watch like 3 or 4 different sources of the news, and it is amazing how you can have the same story presented in 4 different ways, and the goal of most of those stories is to find a villain, and that villain is normally the person that does not agree with you. Sorry for the clickbait title, but I do just want to tell you about why we can't do cruises to nowhere and appeal to each other to quit being mean based on what the news tells you. Are you mad at me? Don't be mad at me. Let's talk about why you can't cruise to nowhere. There is a movement in Singapore right now, how it's related to the cruise news. There is a movement in Singapore right now to do cruises to nowhere. Cruises to nowhere, essentially a cruise that leaves a port city, goes out into international waters, comes back to the same port city. It's all good. The Singapore Tourism Board currently working through a process to get protocols in place so they can submit them to the government to see if they can get approval to cruise to nowhere. That is essentially the cruise news story. Every time we hear about cruises to nowhere somewhere else in the world, inevitably the question is, why can't we cruise to nowhere here in the United States? Well, it is primarily because of 2 major laws that were passed over 100 years ago. Let me tell you about the first one, the Jones Act. A lot of people know about the Jones Act. It was passed in 1920. It was signed into law by Democratic President Woodrow Wilson. But the goal of the Jones Act was to protect shipping interests in the United States, and it deals primarily with cargo. If you take anything away from the conversation about the cruise to nowhere, Jones Act deals with cargo, and essentially what the Congress and what Wilson wanted to do is they wanted to prevent foreign flagged vessels from undercutting shipping rates for U.S. built vessels. In both of the laws that we're going to talk about today, the conversation is whether or not a vessel is coastline qualified. To be coastline qualified in the United States, the ship has to be built in the United States, it has to be registered to the United States, and the people that work on that vessel have to be U.S. citizens. If any of those things are not true, then the vessel is not coastline qualified, and therefore it falls under the provisions of the Jones Act, which means if you're foreign flagged, you cannot take cargo from one U.S. port to another. And so the way that that would work practically, let's just say that there is a shipping company from a foreign land that's got some low prices. They could contract with a company, take a load of oranges from Florida up to Charleston, South Carolina, and they could undercut a U.S. company that does the same thing. The Jones Act put in place to prevent that level of competition with a foreign shipping company. So the goal, the people that were proponents of the Jones Act would say that the goal was to protect shipping interest in the United States. That was passed back in 1920. But that's cargo, so if you're really interested in the law that prevents passengers from moving from one U.S. port to another port, you have to look at the Passenger Vessel Services Act of 1886, passed by Democratic President Grover Cleveland. The Democrats hate cruising. Don't you like how you can spin it like that? No, the Passenger Vessel Services Act works the same way as the Jones Act, but instead of cargo, it's people. So if a ship is not coastline qualified, it cannot go from one U.S. port to another U.S. port. They don't make cruise ships in the United States. It's cost prohibitive. We have one. The NCL Pride is the cruise ship that cruises around Hawaii. It was built in the United States. It is flagged in the United States. It has a crew from the United States. That is it. Other companies have tried to build cruise ships in the United States, failed horribly. It's cost prohibitive, and so we don't have any U.S. cruise ships being built, and so that's why these laws continue to stay in place. We don't have any cruise ships being built in the United States, so it really doesn't make sense for a cruise liner to slap a U.S. flag on a cruise ship that was built somewhere else because they would not be coastline qualified. Why have the extra expense of slapping that U.S. flag on there? They're already outside of the Jones Act. They're already outside of the Passenger Vessel Services Act. And so from a business perspective, you can understand why the cruise lines aren't really interested in flagging foreign vessels with U.S. flags. These two laws prevent cruises to nowhere because foreign vessels have to follow a protocol when it comes to dealing with these laws. Foreign vessels obviously do come to U.S. ports. They can load cargo, they can load passengers, but they can't take that cargo and passengers to another U.S. port without first making a port stop in a foreign land. This is how they deal with the Jones Act. This is how they deal with the Passenger Vessel Services Act. They take passengers and cargo from Florida, they go to the Bahamas, and then they go back to Florida. One significant exception with the Jones Act and the Passenger Vessel Services Act is how it deals with Puerto Rico. These are recent developments. Back in 2003, the Passenger Vessel Services Act was amended to allow trips from the United States to Puerto Rico without a foreign stop in between. And then 2013, it took until the Jones Act was modified to allow shipping to Puerto Rico without any penalty. The reasons noted for these exemptions is there's not that much traffic between U.S. vessels on the mainland and Puerto Rico, and the exemptions are put in place until a time where there is consistent movement of passengers and cargo from the United States to Puerto Rico on U.S.-based vessels. And this is why essentially the laws put in place by Democrats are preventing cruises to nowhere. Isn't that a ridiculous way to politicize a story? Now anybody that doesn't like Democrats, they can jump on board and say that Democrats are not allowing us to cruise to nowhere. I had to look up the political affiliation of those two presidents. I didn't know them off the top of my head. And so if they would have been Republican, I would have said the same thing. Republicans are trying to prevent cruising just to prove the point. I don't really have a political dog in that hunt. I just wanted to show you how absurd it could be to politicize everything and try to fit everything that's going on in the world into some sort of political battle. I don't think it's productive for the society, and I don't think it's productive for humanity. So yeah, normally it's not the way I present the news story, but I figure if everybody's going to flood the comments with political stuff that doesn't have anything to do with cruising anyways, I might as well help you out and maybe tweak your brain a little bit and get you to think about it. Hopefully people are thinking about it. That's the special report from the Cruise News Show. Hope you enjoyed it. Please show your support by hitting the like button. This is Tony for Lido Loca, and until the next time, we'll see you on the Lido. Bye.